The halls of Crestwood High echoed with the familiar noise of students shuffling between classes. Lockers slammed, sneakers squeaked against the linoleum floors, and voices melded into a low hum of conversations, laughter, and occasional outbursts. For most teenagers, this cacophony was the soundtrack of everyday life, a backdrop to friendships, rivalries, and the constant search for identity. But for Jasmine Williams, the noise often felt like a barrier, a wall she couldn't quite penetrate. Crestwood High sat quietly on the edge of town, its red brick walls framed by sprawling oaks and neatly trimmed lawns. To an outsider, it was a picturesque school that took pride in its history and academic reputation. To its students, however, Crestwood was a place where social cliques were rigidly defined, and the subtle lines of division ran deep, sometimes invisible yet always felt. The majority of the student body was white, with only a handful of black students like Jasmine scattered here, and they're often on the fringes of social groups. The school prided itself on being a place of learning and opportunity, but beneath the surface, Jasmine could sense the lingering presence of unspoken prejudice. It wasn't the blatant kind found in old movies or history books. No, it was the quiet kind of glance held just a moment too long, a laugh shared a bit too loudly at her expense, the way her ideas were occasionally dismissed in class discussions, the kind that whispered, "You don't belong here," even when no one said the words aloud. Jasmine wasn't naive. She understood that her skin color made her stand out, marking her as different in ways that affected how she was treated. Yet, she refused to let it define her. Her grades spoke for themselves. She was one of the top students in her grade, known for her sharp mind and steady determination. Teachers respected her, though some occasionally seemed unsure how to connect beyond the academic. Peers admired her quietly, but often kept their distance, either out of awkwardness or the invisible boundaries that prejudice created. Her days at Crestwood were a careful balancing act. Jasmine had learned to blend into the background, to speak softly and avoid unnecessary attention. She carried a heavy backpack filled with books and notes, weapons for her battle for success and respect. Her hair was always neatly styled, her clothes modest but well chosen, a silent message that she belonged and demanded to be taken seriously. But even with her careful efforts, the world around her was not always kind. Brittany and her friends were a constant presence at the edges of Jasmine's life. Brittany was everything Jasmine was not: loud, confident, surrounded by a group of followers who hung on her every word. Together, they wielded their popularity like a shield and a weapon, using it to intimidate those they saw as easy targets. It began with small things. A snide comment in the hallway, a whisper that reached Jasmine's ears just a little too clearly, a jibe about her hair, a joke about her clothes, subtle digs masked as humor. Over time, the teasing grew bolder. Notes left in her locker with cruel messages, social media posts tagging her with insults, and when no one was around, the occasional shove or blocking of her path. Jasmine never fought back. She knew that fighting Brittany's group head-on would only escalate things. Instead, she kept her head down, worked hard, and tried to survive the daily assaults. But inside, every insult, every snicker chipped away at her confidence, making her question if she truly belonged at Crestwood. That morning, the atmosphere felt different, heavier. As Jasmine walked through the crowded hallways, she caught sight of Brittany and her clique across the corridor. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, and Jasmine saw the cold amusement flicker there, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The other girls whispered to each other, glancing in Jasmine's direction, their smiles sharp and cruel. Jasmine's heart quickened, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She told herself it was just another day, another round of bullying she would endure quietly. But the knot in her stomach told her otherwise. Something was about to happen, something she had not prepared for. She clutched her textbooks tightly, the worn edges digging into her palms. Her steps quickened as she headed toward the bathroom, hoping to find a brief moment of peace. The school bathrooms were rarely crowded during passing periods, offering a sanctuary from the noise and the eyes. Jasmine needed that calmer place to gather herself before facing the rest of the day. But as she pushed open the bathroom door, The laughter stopped. The room, usually empty, was no longer a refuge. Brittany and her group stood there, blocking the entrance like sentinels. Their faces were smirks that didn't reach their eyes, expressions that spelled trouble. Going somewhere, Jasmine? Brittany's voice was sharp, dripping with mock sweetness. Her friends circled behind her, creating a wall of intent. Jasmine's throat tightened. She forced a steady voice. I just need a minute. Brittany took a step closer, folding her arms. A minute, huh? Sounds like a long time to me. The tension in the room was suffocating. Jasmine looked around, noting the harsh fluorescent lights, the cold tiles beneath her feet, and the locked store doors no easy escape. For a moment, she felt a flicker of panic, the familiar fear that had gnawed at her since middle school. But then, deep inside, a spark ignited not of fear, but of something fiercer, determination. This wasn't just about a bathroom confrontation. It was about every whispered insult, every sideways glance, every moment she'd been made to feel less than. Jasmine wasn't going to let this moment break her. Not today. Not ever. Jasmine had grown used to the little things, the quiet moments that built up like slow-burning coals, ready to ignite. It wasn't always a single, explosive event that made her days unbearable. More often, it was a series of small wounds, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. A glance held a bit too long with thinly veiled disgust. The casual exclusion when classmates grouped for projects or lunch. The whispered jokes that died the instant she looked their way. There was the time in history class when Brittany and her friends snickered after Jasmine answered a question perfectly, then muttered something under their breath about her trying too hard. Jasmine caught the words faint but unmistakable. It wasn't just about being smart. It was about making sure she knew she was an outsider. Then came the whispers in the hallways. Why does she even try? She doesn't belong here. Even teachers seem to turn a blind eye, dismissing those moments as teenage drama. One afternoon, during lunch, Jasmine sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria, her lunch tray balanced precariously on the edge of the table. Nearby, a group of girls giggled loudly, glancing her way as they passed notes back and forth. One slipped a folded piece of paper onto her tray when no one was looking. Jasmine unfolded it slowly, the paper crackling in her hands. Written in shaky letters were the words, "Go back where you came from." Her stomach churned, but she kept her face steady, folding the note quietly and slipping it into her pocket. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Then there was the day the graffiti appeared on the bathroom mirror, a crude, hateful message scrawled in black marker. Jasmine saw it the moment she walked in. Not welcome here, her heart hammered against her ribs. She wiped the glass clean with trembling hands, but the message was etched deeper in her mind than any surface. These incidents piled up, day after day, making the weight of school unbearable. The hallways didn't feel like places of learning or growth. They were gauntlets Jasmine had to survive. On the morning of the incident, everything seemed normal at first. The sky was a dull grey, matching Jasmine's mood as she made her way through the crowds. Her books pressed tight to her chest. She avoided eye contact, her footsteps steady but cautious. Brittany's group was nearby, chatting loudly with the ease of girls who owned the school. Jasmine's skin prickled with unease. She knew she had to get to the bathroom, a small sanctuary she often used to gather her thoughts. Maybe if she could just have a moment alone, the day wouldn't feel so suffocating. But fate had other plans. As Jasmine pushed open the bathroom door, the usual quiet was shattered. Brittany and her friends stood in a semicircle, blocking the sinks and stalls. Their smiles were cold, predatory. Brittany's eyes gleamed with something cruel. Well, look who decided to drop by. Brittany sneered, stepping forward. Jasmine froze. Her heart lurched in her chest like a trapped bird. The bathroom, her refuge, had become a cage. Going somewhere? Brittany's voice was low but sharp, a warning. Jasmine swallowed hard, searching for a way out. The room was small, the air thick with tension and the faint scent of bleach and soap. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to close in on her. Behind Brittany, her friends shifted, closing ranks. The only exit was the door Jasmine had just walked through, now firmly blocked. "Let me pass," Jasmine said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Brittany laughed, a cold sound that echoed of the tiled walls. "What's the matter? Afraid?" She took a step closer, invading Jasmine's personal space. The other girls chuckled, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Jasmine's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to fight back, to run, to scream for help. But the reality was harsh and no one seemed willing to intervene. The halls outside were crowded, but the noise felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's world. She remembered the many times teachers had passed by, eyes fixed on their phones or coffee cups, ignoring the obvious signs of bullying. Other students had looked away, pretending not to notice. The system was broken, and she was trapped in its cracks. Her pulse thundered in her ears as Brittany reached out and grabbed Jasmine's arm, squeezing tightly. "You're not going anywhere." Jasmine swallowed her fear and forced herself to breathe. She wouldn't let this moment define her. "Not yet." As Brittany's grip tightened on her arm, Jasmine felt a surge of panic ripple through her body. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink into the cold tiled room, the echo of Brittany's mocking laughter ringing in her ears. Yet beneath the fear, a flicker of something stronger stirred, a quiet, stubborn refusal to be broken. Her mind raced, flipping through memories, the whispered insults in hallways, the countless moments when she had been invisible or singled out. Each one was a thought, sharp and painful, but also a reminder that she had survived before, and she could survive now. Jasmine's eyes locked onto Brittany's, steadying herself. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a plea, but a demand to understand. Brittany smirked, clearly enjoying the control she wielded. Around them, the other girls exchanged smirks and giggles, their excitement palpable. The bathroom's fluorescent lights flickered overhead as if echoing the unstable atmosphere. Jasmine's heart hammered louder with each passing second. She could hear the distant murmur of other students in the hallway, yet no one came to help. A janitor pushed past the bathroom door, his eyes briefly flicking inside before he hurried away without a word. Down the hall, a teacher passed by, engrossed in her phone, oblivious or uncaring. This indifference struck almost as much as the bullying itself. Jasmine felt utterly alone, trapped not only by Brittany's cruel circle, but by the silent walls of apathy surrounding her. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The girls began whispering, their voices a low chorus of cruelty. One leaned in close, her breath hot and mocking as she whispered, "You think you're better than us? You don't belong here." Jasmine's fists clenched at her sides, nails digging into her palms. The shame, anger, and frustration twisted inside her chest, threatening to overwhelm. But she fought to steady her voice, to keep control. "I'm here just like anyone else," she said quietly, meeting their eyes. "You don't get to decide who belongs." Brittany's smirk faltered for just a second, enough for Jasmine to sense a crack in the fard of power. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall. Jasmine's heart leapt, hope flaring. But the footsteps passed by, indifferent, and no one stopped to intervene. The bathroom door remained firmly shut, the small space closing in around her like a trap. In that moment, Jasmine understood the cruel truth. Sometimes, the hardest battles were not just with those who openly attacked you, but with the world that turned a blind eye. Yet despite the isolation, a fierce resolve hardened inside her. This was a turning point. She would find a way to rise beyond the pain, beyond the silence. But first, she had to survive this moment. From behind the locked bathroom door, muffled voices drifted down the hall. Students walked past without a second glance, their heads buried in phones or conversations with friends. The buzz of normal school life continued as if nothing were wrong. No hurried footsteps, no sharp calls for help, just the usual unbroken flow of teenagers navigating their own worlds. At the end of the corridor, a group of boys lingered near the lockers. One glanced briefly toward the bathroom, but quickly looked away, shrugging as if it wasn't his problem. "Why get involved?" he muttered to his friends, who just laughed and shook their heads. The message was clear: stay out of it. avoid trouble. A teacher appeared further down the hall, carrying a stack of papers. She passed the bathroom with a glance, but did not stop. Her lips pressed into a tight line, eyes flickering toward Jasmine's direction. But she kept walking, swallowed by her own workload and responsibilities, somewhere deep inside. Perhaps there was discomfort or sympathy, but it was buried beneath the demands of lesson plans, grading, and the relentless pace of the school day. Near the cafeteria entrance, a group of girls chatted animatedly, sharing gossip and plans for the weekend. They noticed the tension, saw Brittany's friends loitering outside the bathroom, but no one said a word. To speak up would mean crossing an unspoken social boundary, risking their own acceptance for the sake of someone deemed an outsider. Even the janitor, who passed by carrying cleaning supplies, spared only a fleeting glance. The world kept turning, indifferent to Jasmine's struggle. Inside the bathroom, Jasmine's breath hitched as the silence beyond the door deepened the feeling of isolation. The walls seemed to close in on her, a stark reminder that sometimes the cruelty of neglect could be as sharp as any insult or shove. She remembered the few moments when a classmate had once looked her way with kindness, but those were rare, like fragile sparks in a dark room. Most days, she was invisible or worse, the target of scorn disguised as jokes. Her mind wrestled with the bitterness of knowing that even if she screamed for help, many would choose to ignore it, not out of malice necessarily, but because it was easier to pretend nothing was wrong. That indifference was a different kind of violence, a silent agreement to let her fight alone. Jasmine's fists clenched again. The cold stares, the turned backs, the quiet avoidance, they all formed a wall she had to break through. And break through she would. The pressure in the cramped bathroom was suffocating. Brittany's grip on Jasmine's arm was firm, but no longer painful, almost as if she expected Jasmine to crumble under the weight of humiliation and fear. But Jasmine felt something else rising inside her, a fierce spark igniting beneath the layers of dread. She took a slow, steadying breath, pushing back the pounding in her chest. The whispers and cruel smiles no longer seemed to hold power over her. Instead, they fueled a quiet fire of defiance. "I am not afraid of you," Jasmine said, her voice calm but resolute. Slicing through the tension like a sharp blade, Brittany blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift. The others exchanged uncertain looks. Jasmine's eyes locked onto Brittany's with unwavering determination. Then, without warning, Jasmine stepped back swiftly, breaking free from Brittany's hold. The bathroom erupted into surprised gasps. Jasmine moved quickly to the nearest sink, grabbing the soap dispenser. With a swift motion, she pressed it hard. The soap sprayed out, splattering across Brittany's face. The crowd froze for a split second, then erupted into shocked laughter mixed with angry shouts. But Jasmine didn't stop. She seized the moment of chaos, backing toward the door. "Leave me alone," she said firmly, pushing past Brittany's stunned friends. Her voice was steady, each word carrying the weight of all the pain and courage she'd gathered. To the door, she paused and turned around, meeting Brittany's glare head-on. "You don't own me. Not here. Not ever." Then Jasmine strode out, leaving behind stunned silence and a trail of disbelief down the hallway. Students paused, whispers rippling like waves. Some stared in awe, others with surprise, but none could deny the power in her stand. The janitor stopped mid-step, the teacher dropped her papers in surprise, and even Brittany's smirk faltered. The moment had shifted, and Jasmine had taken control. For the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt something unfamiliar, but exhilarating. Hope. As Jasmine stepped out of the bathroom, the corridor seemed to hold its breath. Students whispered behind their hands, eyes wide with surprise. The usual noise of lockers slamming and chatter faded to a cautious murmur. Some glanced at Brittany and her friends, who stood frozen, their expressions a mix of shock and anger. The janitor, who had been halfway down the hall, stopped and shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Didn't expect that." A few brave students exchanged looks, curiosity and respect flickering in their eyes. For many, Jasmine's defiance was unexpected, a challenge to the silent rules they'd all unconsciously followed. Down the hall, a teacher hurried over, Papers forgotten, her face tight with concern. Jasmine, are you okay? She asked, voice low but genuine. Jasmine met her gaze steadily. I'm fine, she said, though her heart still pounded. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw ache, but also a newfound strength. News spread quickly through the school. Some students praised Jasmine quietly in the hallways, calling her brave. Others whispered warnings to Brittany's group, their power challenged for the first time. But not everyone was supportive. Rumors began to swirl. Some painted Jasmine as troublemaker. Others urged caution, afraid of stirring up more conflict. Jasmine knew this was only the beginning. Standing up had opened a door, but it also meant walking a path filled with uncertainty. Still, as she returned to her classes, a small smile tugged at her lips. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She had taken control of her story, and no matter what came next, the truth was hers to hold. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at school shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. The usual rhythms of the hallways, the hurried footsteps, whispered gossip, and casual snubs now carried an undercurrent of tension and curiosity. Jasmine noticed eyes following her more closely, some filled with admiration, others with suspicion. Teachers who had previously overlooked the signs of bullying seemed more aware, if not always willing to act decisively. At least two approached Jasmine with quiet questions, their voices careful and tinged with concern. Are you all right? Do you want to talk? One teacher offered gently after class, but Jasmine often found herself brushing off the concern, unwilling or unsure how to open that door. Among her classmates, the ripple effects of her defiance were more complex. A handful of students, especially those who had once been silent witnesses, began to speak up in subtle ways, defending her in passing comments or sidelong glances to Brittany's group. But the group of bullies, far from backing down completely, tightened their circle, casting colder looks and sharpening their taunts in more covert ways. The cafeteria, once a place where Jasmine ate alone, became a battleground of glances and quiet confrontations. Yet she held her head high, no longer shrinking into the shadows. Each day was a test of resilience and resolve. At home, Jasmine wrestled with conflicting emotions. The pride of standing up mingled uneasily with the exhaustion of constant vigilance. She confided in her mother one evening, tears spilling over the kitchen table. I just want to be treated like everyone else, she said softly. Her mother's embrace was fierce and protective. You are stronger than they know. This fight is bigger than just one bathroom or one school. Jasmine realized then that her struggle was not hers alone. It was part of a larger story, one that many faced but few dared to challenge. In quiet moments, Jasmine wrote in her journal, words pouring out in a rush of hope and frustration, dreams and fears. It was her refuge, a place where she could be honest without judgment. The school's administration eventually called a meeting with Brittany's group, warning them of consequences if the bullying continued. But Jasmine knew that true change required more than warnings. It required courage from everyone, including those who had stayed silent. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Other students started forming small groups advocating kindness and respect. Teachers organized workshops about diversity and inclusion, some reluctantly, but the message was spreading. Through it all, Jasmine remained a beacon of quiet strength, a reminder that even in the face of cruelty and indifference, a single voice could ignite change. The day of the school assembly arrived with a heavy weight hanging in the air. Word had spread quickly after the administration announced a special meeting to address bullying and discrimination. The gymnasium was packed, the bleachers filled with students, teachers, and staff, all buzzing with anticipation and unease. Jasmine sat near the front, her heart pounding. This moment felt like the crossroads she had been heading toward since the tense day in the bathroom. She glanced around. Brittany and her group sat stiffly a few rows behind, their usual confident sneers replaced with wary glances. The principal stepped onto the stage, her face serious but hopeful. Thank you all for coming, she began, voice steady. We are here because our school must be a place where every student feels safe, respected, and valued. Double quotes. As the principal spoke about new policies and initiatives, Jasmine's thoughts drifted back to the countless times she had felt invisible or targeted. Then, unexpectedly, the microphone was handed to her. Her breath caught, but Jasmine stood. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. Taking a deep breath, she began. My name is Jasmine. I'm here to share what it's like to face bullying. Not just the words or the actions, but the silence, the moments when no one steps in. That silence can hurt just as much as the cruelty. She spoke honestly, recounting her experiences without anger, but with fierce clarity. She described the day in the bathroom, the fear, and the decision to stand up. Her voice wavered at times, but the room remained captivated. Then she addressed Brittany's group directly. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. We have a choice to continue letting silence and cruelty win, or to choose empathy and courage. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Brittany shifted uncomfortably, but didn't interrupt when Jasmine finished. A student from the audience stood. It was one of Brittany's former friends, her voice shaky but sincere. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't realize how much pain was hidden beneath the surface. Others began to stand, sharing their own stories and pledges to change. The assembly became a powerful moment of reckoning, raw, real, and hopeful. The principal closed the event with a commitment to ongoing dialogue and action. Jasmine returned to her seat, heart pounding but lighter. That day marked a turning point not just for Jasmine, but for the entire school. The walls of indifference had cracked, and through those cracks, a new community began to grow. In the days following the assembly, a subtle but meaningful change began to take hold throughout the school. The conversations Jasmine had sparked continued to ripple outward, carried by students who found courage in her words. Groups formed not just to oppose bullying, but to celebrate diversity and inclusion. Posters appeared on walls, student-led clubs gained momentum, and teachers incorporated lessons on empathy and respect into their curricula. Jasmine felt the shift keenly. While some old tensions lingered, many classmates approached her with newfound respect, or at least a nod of acknowledgement. Brittany and her closest followers seemed to retreat from open hostility, their power visibly diminished. More than that, Jasmine herself felt transformed. The girl who once felt isolated and invisible now walked the halls with her head held high. The battle was far from over, but she had discovered her own voice, and with it, a well of strength she never knew she had. Home. Jasmine shared the changes with her mother, who smiled warmly and squeezed her hand. You're a leader, Jasmine. This is just the beginning, and it was. Though the scars of past bullying remained, they no longer defined her. Instead, Jasmine chose to focus on the community. She was helping to build a community where every student could feel seen, heard, and valued. The journey ahead promised challenges, but for the first time, Jasmine faced it with hope, resilience, and the knowledge that even one person's courage could spark real change. Jasmine's inner voice, calm, thoughtful, layered with strength and vulnerability. I used to think being invisible was safer, that if I stayed quiet, if I stayed small, maybe they'd leave me alone. But silence didn't protect me. It just made their voices louder. The day they cornered me in that bathroom, I felt like I had nothing left, no one on my side, no way out, and maybe that was the moment I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. I found something in myself I didn't know was there. Not rage, not revenge, just clarity. A voice. I stood up, and everything changed. Not all at once, and not completely, but enough to make people see, enough to make them listen, enough to remind myself that I mattered. I still walk past some of the same faces in the hallway. Some look away, some offer a nod, some even smile. But I'm not walking alone anymore. And more important, I'm not hiding. You can't always stop people from hurting you, but you can decide who you become after the pain. I became someone I'm proud of. And if even one person hears this and feels a little less alone, then maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. The end. Racism and bullying thrive in silence, But one voice, one act of courage can begin to change everything. Stand up. Speak out, because everyone deserves to feel safe, seen, and heard.